It's 7 o'clock, and I am going to call the meeting to order. This is the regular meeting of the Kaneland District 302 Board of Education, and we will start with the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Oh,
You okay?
down away again.
Oh boy, got the
And a
good
roll
chair
call,
again.
please.
Mrs. Witt,
Here.
Mr. Carey,
Here.
Mr. Lawler,
Here.
Mrs. Pavlak,
Here.
Mr. Rivas,
Here.
Mrs. Barber,
Here.
Get up again.
and Mr. LePayton is absent.
Okay, with 6 members present, we do have a quorum, and I had not heard that Mr. LePayton was not going to be here, so I expect him to walk in soon. But we would also like to inform all the board meeting attendees that this meeting is being live streamed and archived for access at any time by our community members on the internet within 24 to 48 hours of the meeting's conclusion. So next item is the consideration of moving consent agenda items to new business. Is there anybody that has something they would like to move? Okay, hearing none, we'll move on to the approval of the agenda. We need approval of the agenda tonight as amended. There's a couple of changes. One is in the consent agenda and one is under new business. They're just clerical changes on the paperwork. So moved. Second. And a roll call, please.
Mr. Carey.
Aye.
Mr. Lawler.
Aye.
Mrs. Pavlak.
Aye.
Mr. Rivas.
Aye.
Mrs. Barber.
Aye.
Mrs. Witt.
Aye. Motion carries 7-0.
6-0.
6-0. Oh, 6-0. Whoops, sorry. Peter was there again. No. Move on now to Board and Superintendent salutes, and I'll pass it on to you.
Yeah, we have one tonight. Mid-Valley Special Ed Cooperative communicated with us about a week ago with some good news and some recognition for Mr. Payton. So I'll turn it over to Julianne, who works more closely with Mark, and let her share the information.
So on behalf of Kaneland School District, I'd like to present Mr. Payton with the Business Partnership Award from Mid-Valley Special Education Cooperative and a certificate from the Kaneland Board. So I'll let you do that. Mr. Payton is our Director of Buildings and Grounds, and he has been working with students who are Kaneland students with special needs, 2 young men in particular, one with a hearing impairment and one with developmental needs. And he has worked with them a couple hours a week throughout the school year and the summer to provide them with gainful employment, doing some cleaning tasks and other duties around the district, specifically at the high school and at Harder Middle School. We are very proud of Mr. Payton when he does work with students like this, because it does help to further our strategic plan with Kaneland 2020. As you know, he was recognized for developing business partnerships, and this is one of the ways in which we work with our students. And please help me congratulate Mr. Payton. We're very excited. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Payton.
Congratulations. Thank you.
No, I didn't have to.
Other thing, just of note, we don't. That's our only one for tonight formally that I have. Then just on June 25th, we'll have our Harder and KHS activity and activity students and athletes to be recognized for the spring sports, and that'll be at the June 25th meeting. So that's all I have for tonight.
Very good. Dr. Fuchs, anything else?
Nope, that's it.
Board members?
Nope.
Okay. This is the first opportunity for public comment in the board meeting. We generally have 2 opportunities, one at the beginning and one at the end. We value the input from the public, but we do have a few rules. We ask that you stand, state your name and your village of residence or your association with us for the record, and limit your comments to 3 minutes or less, so that all who wish to speak may have the opportunity. You're encouraged to seek a private appointment to discuss matters concerning individual students or staff members. And just a reminder that the board does not enter into debate or respond to questions during the public comment. We usually have someone contact you afterwards. So that being said, the floor is now open for public comment. Are there any public comments? Okay. Hearing none, we'll move on. Tonight's consent agenda contains the following action items: the approval of accounts payable and payroll from May 2018, the approval of the minutes of the May 14th, 2018 regular meeting, the approval of the resignations and employment of staff, the approval of Valley's salary and benefit recommendations for 2018-2019, and the following informational items: the student suspension data report, the Freedom of Information Act FOIA requests report, and the Kaneland 2020 update. So we're looking for a motion to approve the consent agenda tonight as amended due to that clerical issue in number 2.
So moved.
Second. And a roll call, please.
Mr. Lawler.
Aye.
Mr. LePayton. Mrs. Pavlak.
Aye.
Mr. Rivas.
Aye.
Mrs. Sparber.
Aye.
Mrs. Witt.
Aye.
Mr. Carey.
Aye.
Motion carries 7-0. And move on now to new business. And the first item on the agenda, item J1, is the annual reorganization of the board.
Yes, thank you, President Witt. Under Board Policy 2210, the board must reorganize itself on an annual basis. In the past, this has traditionally involved 3 activities: the election of officers, the appointment of board liaisons, and determination of the board's calendar. If you'll recall, back in March, we actually approved the calendar already, the board meeting calendar for next year. So for tonight, we'll do the election of officers, and then we'll have some conversation after that regarding committee liaisons, and get some direction from the board as far as planning for the upcoming school year for the committees. So I'll turn it back over, and again, the way it works, President Pro Tem, in the past, the president would elect the superintendent to be President Pro Tem, just to lead the small part to get a new board president, to run that process, and then once that is completed, then the board president, the new elected board president, would take it from there to do the vice president and the secretary. So I'll turn it back to you.
Okay, so at this time, I move that Dr. Todd Layden be elected President Pro Tem. And a roll call, please.
Mr. LePayton.
Aye.
Mrs. Pavlak.
Aye.
Mr. Rivas. Mrs. Sparber.
Aye.
Mrs. Witt.
Aye.
Mr. Carey.
Aye.
Mr. Lawler.
Aye.
Motion carries 7-0.
Thank you. At this time now, as I just shared, as far as the reorganization of the board, would like to open the floor for nominations of the office of President of our Board of Education.
I nominate Shauna Sparber to the office of President of the Kaneland Board of Education.
I'll second that.
Are there any other nominations? With a motion on the floor, any discussion? No? Okay. With a motion and a second, Beth, can we please get a roll call?
Mrs. Pavlak.
Aye.
Mr. Rivas.
Yes.
Mrs. Sparber.
Aye.
Mrs. Witt.
Aye.
Mr. Carey.
Aye.
Mr. Lawler.
Aye.
Mr. LePayton.
Motion carries 7-0.
Thank you. Congratulations. And while we do a quick little transition of seating, I would like to take a second to thank Teresa Witt for her years of service as a president, and also over the past year. Just thank you for your work and your dedication to the district and to our school board. So thank you,
It's
Teresa.
been my honor and pleasure.
Thank you. Thanks.
On the far left end of
Far left.
All right. And I'd just like to echo Dr. Layden's comments. Thank you very much, Teresa. You've served us well for many years now. Oh, thank you so much. I know you will be great. All right, we'll see how this meeting goes. Okay, so we will switch pages here. So next we will open up the nominations for vice president.
I nominate Ryan Carey.
Is there a second?
Second, Matt?
Are there any other nominations? Seeing none, are there, since we have a motion and a second, is there any discussion? No? Okay, then a roll call.
Mr. Rivas.
Yes.
Mrs. Sparber.
Aye.
Mrs. Witt.
Aye.
Mr. Carey.
Aye.
Mr. Lawler.
Aye.
Mr. LePayton.
Aye.
Mrs. Pavlik.
Aye.
Motion carries 7-0. All right, and now,
Thank you.
congratulations. Now we'll move on to board secretary.
Congratulations.
You'll do great.
You'll do great.
All right, I'd like to open up the floor for nominations for board secretary.
I would like to nominate Gail to continue.
I second. Your second. And any other nominations? No, for discussion? All right, seeing none, we can move to a vote.
Mrs. Sparber.
Aye.
Mrs. Witt.
Aye.
Mr. Carey.
Aye.
Mr. Lawler.
Aye.
Mr. LePayton.
Aye.
Mrs. Pavlik.
Aye.
Mr. Rivas.
Aye.
All right, motion carried 7-0. Congratulations, Gail.
Thank you. My honor.
All right, so now we'll move on to J2, approval.
We have a little conversation on the liaison.
Oh,
as far
yes.
as the committee liaison.
Yes,
Yep.
the committee liaisons. Take it away.
Yep, just as a review or a reminder, over the last couple of years, or since I've been in the district, and I think a couple of years previous, our board has determined so that all the board members could participate on the various committees to have kind of a rolling attendance. And I know Mr. Rivas has been put together a calendar each year for us and rotated everybody through so they could all attend various committees. And so I know that the board has done that in the past. And just wanted to share that background and then let the board have some conversation to see if that's what they want to continue as far as their practice moving forward.
What's that, do the calendar?
I would like
Pedro, we would like.
Yes, that part.
If we want to.
Did you sense that coming?
I like the rotation, and I greatly appreciate the work you put into make that calendar.
It is helpful, seeing it for the year in advance.
Someone give me a calendar. Sure, no big deal.
And I think that we've been doing that, with CAC, FAC, FPC, but there is also Hall of Fame and Foundation. I don't know if I'm missing anything else.
FPC,
FPC is
CAC.
in there. Is there
FPC
anything different
Foundation.
we would like to do with any of those committees? I know lately I've been attending the Foundation. I don't know if we want to rotate through that or have one person go to that.
I think it was a consistency they wanted on that one though,
Yeah.
wasn't it? Right, Todd?
Yeah, there was a consistency just with at least the 2 meetings in a row, because that's where we discuss all of the grants and then we vote on the grants at the next one. So at least that part, there would be consistency on the foundation, or for those 2 meetings. And they meet 4 times a year as opposed to monthly like the other committees.
I was wondering if we should move away from having, I understand this is part of the bylaws, but move away from having a board member at the foundation. I mean, they are a private, a 501c3, they're an independent. I mean, I can understand that, it's not the same as just one of our advisory committees. It's more like a PTO or a PTN.
Right.
So I don't know what anyone else thinks of that, but.
I've never been to a meeting, so I for
I haven't
that
either.
particular committee, so I don't.
I think it's nice to have the linkage, but whether it needs to be a board member or whether it can be administration, I don't have a strong feeling either way about it.
I would say that it could work both ways easily, because the other booster clubs and PTA, PTOs, PTNs don't have them. I would say that the major benefit, that if the board moves away from it, that I would still hope that the board would have is the ongoing support of the foundation and the grants, and just continuing to trumpet the cause of the foundation. And I know the board has done that, whether it's through liaison or not, and I would just hope that the board would continue, and I would imagine there'd be no reason not to, but I would just want to make sure that we continue to communicate in the same manner.
And I'm happy to go for the 4 meetings. It isn't that many. But if someone else wants to rotate through, I know some people haven't been there, or we can kind of play it by ear with their bylaws too and see if we want to make changes. So should we leave it status quo?
I'm okay with that.
You're the backup to everybody anyway, right?
Sure it is. Be ready to attend those.
And they're across the street from my house, but that has nothing to do with it. Okay.
So we do have a consensus to continue
Yeah.
the foundation? We do? Okay.
Okay.
And just the rotation of the meetings, I just make sure everybody can attend at least one of each of them throughout
Yeah.
the year, and then
Yeah.
whatever's left, and I just throw it against the wall. That
Okay.
works.
It seems to have worked pretty well.
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
that's
you're doing a good job.
And then Pedro, within the next day or two, I'll email you all the dates of all the different committees for next year, and that way, if you want to start to rotate the calendar, you can have all the dates for next year.
That would be awesome. Okay, thank you.
Yep.
All right. So I think that's everything with J1 now?
It is.
Yes, all
It
right.
is, yep.
So J2, approval of non-speak support staff salary increases for 2018-19.
Yeah, this one is Julianne is the supervisor of a number of those directors. I'll let Julianne share this one, and then I'll be doing J3. So Dr. Fuchs?
Great, thank you. As Dr. Layden mentioned, the non-speak, non-KEA salaries or hourly rates of pay would include the district office, the technology department, the transportation department, and the operations and maintenance departments. And so those are the folks that we're speaking of tonight. The administration is recommending that we use the same formula that is in the KEA contract to set the salary for the 2018-19 school year for this group of employees. That will provide a level of consistency for the majority of the district. Please note, the formula itself cannot be finalized until August. However, this group of people, many of them, their contracts run from July to June. So we picked the number closest to what we think it's going to be. And that number right now is 1.8%. To the formula. We're only waiting for one more piece of data for the formula, and we can estimate that pretty closely. With that being said, the approximate impact on the budget for this group of folks is about $145,000 at 1.8%. On the back side of the memo, I've also included recommendations for substitute salaries, and bus aides, temporaries, interns, summer workers, translators. There's a number of other hourly temporary positions. The changes in the proposed rates for 18-19 are in the right-hand column, and they're in bold. This item was amended on the agenda because one important word was left off of a category. If you'll look closer to the bottom, the monitors, crossing guards, lunch meal delivery, these are the rates for the substitutes for those positions if a substitute is needed. The actual rate for those positions was set at the minimum staffing plan back in March when Mr. Atkins presented that to you, and their current rate is $13 per hour. The substitutes then would be paid $10 per hour. So at this time, I'd like to have the recommendation that the board approve the average of 1.8% for the non-speak support staff employees at a total cost of approximately $145,000, and then these daily hourly rates for substitute and seasonal positions as presented.
Any comments or questions from the board?
Well, I'll speak at once, huh? The formula that you're referencing is basically the same without a couple small pieces of the formula that we use to determine what our tax rate cap is going to be, is it not? Our increase. I mean, it doesn't take into account new growth within the district, but inflation and...
It does have the CPI as a part of the formula. Yes, it does.
Right.
And that is a part of the tax cap or the tax rate formula as well. That formula is a bit different, but it does use that component, which has the inflation component in it. Our district's revenue is limited by inflation, a rate of inflation. And so by using this formula, we can help ensure that our revenues or our expenditures specifically on salaries, which is a large portion of our budget, are similar to our revenues when we use that calculation or indicator of inflation.
I mumbled through what I tried to say. So,
Okay?
the point behind this formula is what you said, to kind of match what, we can only increase our revenue so much, we're limited by law. So the point of this formula, by using CPI and inflation, is to sort of, not exactly, but relatively closely mirror what our limits are in our increase in revenue every year.
That is correct.
Okay, thank you. The other question is, I know in the past we've had problems finding like substitute bus drivers and substitute teachers. Are you confident that these substitute rates are going to prevent those problems?
I will say we've had less problems since we've increased them. We increased them 2 or 3 years ago now. I think, say it again?
I think it was
2 years ago. And so while there are still Fridays in May and December where we run short, I would say that we have done a better job filling substitutes than we have in the past.
Okay, thank you.
And bus aides, we are still able to find them usually within a couple weeks when we need them, usually. So we can keep an eye on that, though.
Dr. Fuchs, the $145,000, that does not include the substitutes, is that right?
No.
Does that vary a lot, that substitute year by year?
I'll need to check into that. What we do when we do the budget is we take a look at the past year and see if there's been any significant changes, and then we look at the average for a couple years prior to that, and then make our budgeting decisions based on that. I would say it ebbs and flows, primarily based on the number of people that need medical leave for maternity leave.
Sure.
If we know that we have lots of maternity leaves, we'll increase that. If we don't know of them, then we'll use some averaging. So it's a combination of what we know and past experience.
Okay, thank you.
Anything else? All right, if not, I'd like to entertain a motion that the Kaneland Board of Education approve an average of 1.8% salary increase for non-speak support staff employees at a total cost of approximately $145,000, and the daily hourly rates for substitute and seasonal positions as presented.
So moved.
Is there a second?
I'll second it.
All right. Any other discussion on the motion? If not, we'll move to a vote.
Mrs. Witt?
Aye.
Mr. Carey?
Aye.
Mr. Lawler?
Aye.
Mr. LePayton?
Aye.
Mrs. Pavlak?
Aye.
Mr. Rivas?
Aye.
Mrs. Barber?
Aye. Motion carried 7-0. All right, thank you. And then we'll move on to J3, approval of administration contracts and salary increases for 2018-19.
Yeah, thank you. Similar to what Dr. Fuchs just shared, a couple things that are a little bit different. Administrators are on single-year contracts, and each year we annually renew those contracts, and so it's our recommendation tonight to also use the same revenue sharing formula, which is estimated, as Dr. Fuchs just shared, at 1.8%, which would end up being right around an approximate of $29,000 of new dollars for the district administrators for their contracts for next year. And so, again, it's very similar, and as the district has worked exhaustively and cooperatively to reduce the planned expenditures by $3 million over the next 2 years. Part of the recommendation is to control the planned expenditures moving forward. As Dr. Fuchs said, with salary being such a large part of it, this revenue sharing formula will go a long ways in helping control some of those costs in regard to salaries. So just like in the previous one, it's our recommendation that contracts be approved based on using the revenue sharing formula.
All right, any discussion, question?
Just a general question for the Fox Valley Career Center. I see that there's people on here for that, but doesn't the consortium have to approve that, or how does the mechanics of that work?
Yeah, We are the district liaison for the Fox Valley Career Center, just as St. Charles is for Mid-Valley. So the Mid-Valley salaries fall under St. Charles, whereas Fox Valley Career Center and Valleys fall under ours. So the agreements that we have would then be in place for Fox Valley Career Center and Valleys.
Okay, so we technically employ them, and then that's why they
Yes.
fall on this?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
And then all the different districts compile the tuition for all the students that come.
Okay.
Anything else? All right.
I have a,
Okay.
I don't know if you guys can answer this or not off the top of your heads, but I know, so it's a $29,000 impact for administrators. It's, we just say for 145 for the non-speak. What's speak and KEA again?
Those are yet to be determined.
What did we think it was, or, no, we don't have an answer for that yet?
No,
Okay.
not yet.
But the idea would be to use that same formula across the board, right? That 1.8.
We believe it would work well.
Yep.
Anything else? Okay, then I'd like to entertain a motion that the Kaneland Board of Education approve the administrator contracts and salaries for the 2018-2019 school year as presented.
I'll second.
Roll call?
Mr. Carey,
Aye.
Mr. Lawler,
Aye.
Mr. LePayton,
Aye.
Mrs. Pavlik,
Aye.
Mr. Rivas,
Aye.
Mrs. Barber,
Aye.
Mrs. Witt.
Aye.
All right, motion carries 7-0. All right, moving on to J4, approval of educational support staff, non-speak bus drivers, and food service employee handbooks, first reading.
Yep. I'll let Dr. Fuchs share the highlights of this memo.
Alrighty, so with the three handbooks, educational support staff, which would be again non-speak, food service, non-speak, and then transportation. There were very few changes in this year's handbooks. A couple of them I can walk through very quickly. The one is the 18-19 health insurance. We are keeping the caps in there in place at the same rates as the 2017-18 rates. So in the first handbook, that can be found on page 8. And again, those rates are the same. Those are the maximum amounts that the board would be responsible for paying. Okay, and those would be for employees hired on or after July 1, 2015. Okay. Secondly, in January of 2018, the board updated the workplace harassment policy 520. And so that has been updated in all three handbooks. So that one is consistent across the board.
That was part of the press policies, right?
That is correct. Okay. Yep. The food service handbook, under each of the individual, what do you call them? Procedures, I would call it. There is a new review date of May of 18. When the state audits our procedures, they look to know that the staff and the board have reviewed them on an annual basis. So you'll start to see whether or not, if things are revised, it would go after the revised date. If it's reviewed and no changes, then there's a reviewed date. And that way the auditors can see that while the procedure is in place, it was reviewed for currency and accuracy. So the workplace harassment was also changed in the food service, just like the other one. Those were the only two changes in the food service. In the transportation handbook, I updated the health insurance, just like the support staff one. I updated the pay rate chart at 1.8%. The workplace harassment, which again is the same. And then the only other thing that we updated were some procedures for special education routes. With special education routes being relatively new, we added a number of procedures that help to determine who gets paid, when they get paid, if the route is contracted, or if they have to bid it. And our whole goal, as we mentioned to the board when we started this endeavor, is that we want to provide as much consistency for the special needs students as possible. Sometimes that means it's inconvenient for the adults, but on the other hand, we are trying to develop procedures that are as fair as possible, but in the best interest of the students with special needs. So those procedures are in the transportation handbook, and it's really Procedure A, Section 9 on that second page there. Otherwise, the handbooks are pretty much in good shape. We've done a number of changes over the years, and this happens to be one that didn't require too many changes. But I'd be glad to answer any questions.
Anything from the board? No? All right. Seeing none, I'd like to entertain a motion that the Kaneland Board of Education approve the recommended changes to the Educational Support Staff Handbook, Food Service Handbook, and Transportation Handbook as presented on first reading.
So moved.
Second.
I'll second it.
Roll call when you're ready.
Mr. Lawler.
Aye.
Mr. LePayton.
Aye.
Mrs. Pavlak.
Aye.
Mr. Rivas.
Aye.
Mrs. Sparber.
Aye.
Mrs. Witt.
Aye.
Mr. Carey.
Aye.
Motion carried 7-0.
And I'll put the second reading and consent for the next time as is.
All right, and then moving on to J5, approval of additional 1.0 FTE certified staff for early childhood program and additional 1.0 FTE paraprofessional at Kaneland Blackberry Creek Elementary School.
Yep, thank you. As you know, in March, we approve the minimum staffing plan every year, and specifically call it the minimum staffing plan because we know there are changes happen throughout the spring and summer, whether it's, in this case, a student with an or students with IEPs that are enrolling, or needs of students, or levels that just happen to grow, or a course that might need shifting. So with that as a little bit of the backdrop, I'll let Mr. Atkins give us a little more of an update and answer any questions.
Thank you. Good evening. So as Dr. Lade mentioned, we do monitor enrollments. Additionally, with early childhood, so that the board can be reminded, we're obligated to do what's called child find, where we have to proactively go out and seek students with developmental delays or special education entitlements. And as we come across those children through networking with preschools and various agencies in the community, we then conduct case studies. Those case studies may or may not lead to entitlements for an individualized education plan. This year, I think it's a great thing that our child find activities have been very successful. We staffed our early childhood program in the March timeframe at 3 teachers, which would be 6 sections because it's a half-day program, so every teacher does an AM and a PM. And then since then, through child find, through move-ins and some natural growth, we have enough students to add another 2 sections, which would be the additional FTE. The way early childhood classes work, the class would come with a certified teacher and the paraprofessional, so that's why there's the request for both FTEs on there. And then on top of that, please know that due to child find, when children turn 3, they are instantly eligible. So for example, if I have a 2.5-year-old who's entitled to services and I get assessed in December and their birthday's in January, I don't wait till the following August to start school. I start the day I turn 3. And because of that, historically, every year, we have 10 to a dozen students who become enrolled throughout the course of the year. Right now, we are completely full. By adding this 4th section, we'll be able to get our class sizes down to a reasonable place to then accommodate those 10 to 12 students that we historically get each year, and then have full classes throughout the year. So we're requesting the additional allotment of the FTE for the certified teacher and for the paraprofessional so that we can open up an additional section of early childhood at Blackberry Creek, akin to having a one-on-one or a program paraprofessional through the IEP process. This is a piece that is mandated by the IEP process. So we're excited to be building our early childhood program. We're excited that it's expanding, and we're excited to see what we can do with these 3- and 4-year-olds moving into next school year. Any questions?
We're required to do pretty much all of this, right?
Yes, sir.
Yes, we are.
So there really isn't much to discuss because we have to do it.
Right.
No, but I think it's important for the board to know that the program is very successful, that it's doing what it's supposed to, and that we're going to be able to bring these children in and prepare them for their K-12 experience.
Thank you.
Yeah, welcome. Thank you.
All right, anything else from the board?
I will make the motion to approve it as presented.
All right, so,
Second.
all right, so it's been moved and seconded that the Kaneland Board of Education approve a 1.0 certified FTE and 1.0 FTE for KEA and Speak to comply with the special education needs of early childhood students. Any other discussion?
One question.
Yeah.
The offset. What percentage of that is from the actual cost?
Oh, gosh.
Very little?
No, a significant amount. If you figure that the placeholders that we use for FTEs would be $60,000 for a KEA member and $30,000 for a Speak member, and that would be their pay rate or salary plus all the benefits that go with that. The reimbursement rate for those two positions is typically about $52,000, so 52 out of approximately 90, but it may be more or less depending on the experience or education level of the employees that we hire.
Okay.
So.
Thank you.
Nothing else, a roll call?
Mr. LePayton.
Aye.
Mrs. Pavlik.
Aye.
Mr. Rivas.
Aye.
Mrs. Barber.
Aye.
Mrs. Witt.
Aye.
Mr. Carey.
Aye.
Mr. Lawler.
Aye.
All right, motion carries 7-0. And then we'll move on to J6, approval of resolution authorizing honorable dismissal of certain educational support staff.
Yep, I'll ask Mr. Atkins to come back up and fill us in.
Absolutely. Thank you. So if you recall, several months ago, we had to conduct a reduction in force of our paraprofessional employee group. And at that same meeting, we also employed one paraprofessional who was replacing a parapro that had just left the district and moved to another state. And so as we onboarded that new employee knew that they were a temporary employee for the duration of the 17-18 school year because we had that need. There was no one to replace that person. And they knew that at the end of this year, we would give them the proper notice and then reduce them in force at the end of this current school year. This person being reduced would have recall rights. They would be at the end of that recall list that you saw back in April. This employee's done a terrific job for us, and we'd love to see this employee come back. But as we had talked, as I just mentioned, it was for the duration of the 17-18 school year to replace someone that had just resigned at that same time frame. So we're asking the board to approve the honorable dismissal of this employee, and again, with our sincere hope that come the fall, with all of the different things that go on with IEP placements and such, that we'd be able to recall this employee along with all the other employees.
Thank you. Any questions from the board?
Thank you.
All right, seeing none, we'll like to entertain a motion that the Kaneland Board of Education approve the resolution authorizing honorable dismissal of a certain educational support personnel.
So moved.
Is there a second?
I'll second it.
Any more discussion? All right, a roll call when you're ready.
Mrs. Pavlik.
Aye.
Mr. Rivas.
Aye.
Mrs. Barber.
Aye.
Mrs. Witt.
Aye.
Mr. Carey.
Aye.
Mr. Lawler.
Aye.
Mr. LePayton.
Aye.
All right, motion carries 7-0. And I think we'll move on to the superintendent report.
Yes, first thing, tomorrow is the annual State of the Sugar Grove address that will be held at Waubonsee Community College tomorrow morning from about 8 o'clock to 11 or so. And I know that we have Mrs. Witt, Mrs. Barber, Dr. Fuchs, and myself will be attending that. So any information that we hear from there or learn from there, we'll make sure we forward that out to the board or provide board updates. The next event to know about, on June 6th, we have our senior athletic awards, and as part of that, we'll have Hall of Fame induction for both Leslie Hudgens and Dana Ladau Wagner, which are our 4th and 5th Hall of Fame inductees, so our last 2 of the 5 Hall of Fame inductees class of 2018. Then also on the same day, next Wednesday, during the day, we have an initial personalized learning 2.0 over at Meredith Street School. Dr. Mum and Mike Rice will be leading this with a number of administrators and members of Ignite. Part of the idea of this date is to go through and plan and organize for August when we start the school year and do personalized learning for the rest of our staff, for all of our certified staff and support staff. Then following chronologically on June 12th, we have our next round of speak negotiations, which will be here, different time than normal. It's during the day with school being out very recently. With school being out, so we'll meet from 1 o'clock to 4 o'clock on that day. Then the next 2 items of note are both follow-up items from topics for future agendas. If you'll recall, over the winter and spring, a couple different topics have come up. And so for the June 25th meeting, we'll bring back the topic of having high school and maybe middle school, we'll have to talk through that, but having activity clubs come and present at the beginning of board meetings. I know we have salutes, but there was the idea and a consensus of the board was to learn more about it and have a conversation. So on June 5th, I'll bring some information on the number of activities that we have, the number of students may be represented, and the board can have some conversation and determine if that is something we do want to do as a standing board agenda item, or if we want to highlight it in a different manner. And then the another topic for future agenda that we'll do on July 30th. If you'll recall, late November, we started videotaping all of our school board meetings. And so what we'll do is we'll provide all of the cost, the expenses, the number of views, any other analytics and questions that you might have. We'll get as much information from Tim, maybe even have Tim come and if there's questions that need to be answered, but we'll have that topic covered at the July board meeting, and then at that point determine if that's something that the board and administration recommend moving forward. So those are 5 or 6 of the things that I had, so thank you. Oh, and last night was our Harder promotion. We had about 360 students, looked very nice, and then afterwards have their 8th grade dance and acted just as well, I believe, and so they're officially done now and are ready to become freshmen in a couple months. So that was all I had. Thank you.
Dr. Fuchs?
I don't have anything tonight, thank you.
Anyone else? No. Topics for future agendas. Does anyone have any topics for future agenda?
I'd like to suggest us revisit our bullying policy. Maybe discuss further. Maybe potentially out of that, maybe any revisions and things that we come up with from a discussion standpoint.
To review the policy, right? So you're saying?
Right.
Oh, review the bullying?
Our bully policy. I'd like to, for us to have it in one of our meetings to discuss it further and maybe see if there's any revisions we need to make to it. I know it comes up, but at the same time I'd like for us to discuss it and see if there's any. It seems like it's everything going around across the country. It seems like it goes back to that. And I'd hope for us, although we can't catch everything, at least maybe there's some things that we're learning we maybe want to add to or revise.
So is there an interest on the board? Thumbs up, thumbs down?
What is it used to be April that the bullying update came up. And I don't remember, it may have been in consent this last April, I can't remember. But it's one of those, it's on the rotating calendar, so I just wondered if it was coming up soon anyway.
Well, I can take a look, and then what I can do too is I can look and see when the last time the press policy was updated, see what changes have taken place from the previous press policy to the updated one, and then also just see I can gain some data collection. If it's the will of the board to have this conversation in the future, we can probably have it into the fall as we start school year and see if there's anything that should be considered.
That'd be a good idea.
And as you're thinking, not just policy, like procedures,
Uh,
or just anything?
I actually, to be honest with you, I don't know what's in there unless I look at it again.
Yeah.
But I'm sure there's a lot of that in there. There was a group that was formed or something, Todd, recently that was kind of around that topic, right?
The student group or the one that Mike Rice met with?
Administrators, how to handle bullying when it happens, that type of thing. I'm fuzzy about it, but I thought there was something out there recently that just happened.
I can provide that update. I can look into that and provide that update for you, or for the entire board.
Thank you.
So if people are interested in,
What a consensus for the topic.
Yeah, I think it's a fair conversation.
Yeah.
Sure.
Especially in this day and age.
any other topics? No? All right. Then now is the time in the meeting for the second opportunity for public comment, following the rules that Teresa stated earlier. Is there anyone who would like to make a public comment?
Excuse me.
Seeing none, I will close the floor to public comments. Let me get my bearings. All right. So we will move into, tonight we have executive session. The Board of Education is scheduled for an executive session where we anticipate action to be taken following the executive session. Once the executive session has concluded, the recording will include the action taken by the Board of Education planned for this evening. We are going to go into an executive session to discuss collective negotiating matters between the public body and its employees or the representatives, or deliberations concerning salary schedules for one or more classes of employees, as well as the appointment, employment, compensation, discipline, performance, or dismissal of specific employees of the public body or legal counsel for the public body, including hearing testimony on a complaint lodged against an employee of the public body or against legal counsel for the public body to determine its validity. So having stated the reasons for executive session, I'd like to entertain a motion that the Kaneland Board of Education adjourn, move into executive session?
Yep.
Yes.
All right. Going down my list. All right. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Second.
All right. And a roll call.
Mr. Rivas.
Aye.
Mrs. Barber.
Aye.
Mrs. Witt.
Aye.
Mr. Carey.
Aye.
Mr. Lawler.
Aye.
Mr. LePayton.
Aye.
Mrs. Pavlak.
Aye.
All right. Motion carries 7-0.
You said 6:40.
So.
Yep. Yeah, that's it. just motion to go back into closed session and
Okay.
repeat, do it again.
Are these still on?
Are they coming in?
You're good?
Oh, they're just visiting, okay.
Okay, we are now back in open session where the live video stream will continue. So I just do the motion?
A little bit of
Or read
that,
this?
yeah, a little bit of that, and then you can do the motion.
All right, so the administration has recommended the dismissal of a certain Kaneland High School security monitor due to poor performance evaluation. The employee has been notified of this recommendation and has been given the opportunity to resign in lieu of dismissal. She has also been notified that she may request a hearing before the board to review the recommendation at tonight's Board of Education meeting in closed session. The employee had until noon, May 29th, 2018, to inform the administration of her intent to participate in the hearing. So no, should I ask for discussion or a motion at this point?
I think we need to get the motion on the floor first, and if there's any
And then if there's
discussion of that, so we get the motion.
So I'd like to entertain a motion that Mrs. Francesca Bruzino be dismissed due to her poor evaluation.
So moved.
Is there a second?
I'll second it.
And then discussion. All right, then a roll call.
Mrs. Sparber.
Aye.
Mrs. Witt.
Aye.
Mr. Carey.
Aye.
Mr. Long.
Aye.
Mr. LePayton.
Aye.
Mrs. Pavlik. Aye. Mr. Rivas.
No.
Motion carried 6-1.
Okay.
All right. So then we will go back into executive
Now
session.
he needs to do,
Now you'll need a roll call for the going back.
Yeah,
Yes.
roll call again. That's it, Andrew, thank you.